Patience was known far and wide, not just for her wealth, but for her generosity and the love she had for her only child, George. He was polite, kind-hearted, and always willing to help others. To Patience, George was her entire world. One fateful day, George had woken up and went about his usual tasks. But by the afternoon, something was wrong. He complained of feeling dizzy, and his body was unusually warm, and after some hours, his fever had spiked, and his body felt weak. He couldn't get out of bed, and he was barely able to speak. Panic rose in Patience's chest as she rushed him to the hospital. She hired the best doctors she could find, but each of them had the same confused look on their faces after examining George. "I don't know what's wrong with him," one doctor admitted. "We've run all the tests, and nothing seems to explain his condition," said another. George's health continued to decline rapidly. His once vibrant body was now frail, and his skin was pale. He couldn't eat, couldn't drink, and he barely had the strength to open his eyes. Patience stayed by his bedside day and night, praying and hoping that he would get better. But despite all the care she gave him, George only got worse. Finally, one of the doctors told Patience something that sent chills through her body. "Madame, we've done all we can. Perhaps you should prepare for the worst." Prepare for the worst? Patience couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could she prepare for the possibility of losing her son? No, she wouldn't accept it. There had to be something more she could do. In her desperation, Patience sought the advice of friends and elders. One of them told her about a powerful herbalist who lived far from the city, deep in the forest. This herbalist was said to know ancient remedies and have powers that even modern doctors didn't understand. Without hesitation, Patience decided to go to him, hoping he could save her son. Patience made the long journey to the herbalist's village, desperate for help. When she arrived, the herbalist welcomed her without saying much, sensing her sorrow before she even spoke. Patience wasted no time. She knelt before him and begged for help, explaining how her son had fallen ill and how the doctors could not help him. The herbalist listened carefully and then asked for George's name. He closed his eyes, muttered some strange words under his breath, and then stood up. He walked around his hut, gathering herbs, lighting incense, and making gestures that Patience did not understand. After what felt like an eternity, the herbalist turned to Patience with a grave expression. "Your son's illness is not from the natural world," he said in a deep, serious voice. "This sickness is spreading quickly within him, like a fire that cannot be put out by ordinary means. If nothing is done, he will not live past tomorrow night." Patience gasped, her heart beating wildly in her chest. "But there must be something you can do. Please, I beg you." The herbalist nodded slowly. "There is a way, but it is not an easy choice. It involves a ritual, a powerful one. To save your son, you must transfer his illness into another boy. But the price will be his life. A boy of the same age as your son must take his place." Patience froze. The herbalist's words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Save George by taking another child's life? How could she do such a thing? How could she take away someone else's son, knowing the pain of losing a child? The herbalist stood silently, giving her time to think. Patience was torn. Her love for George was so strong, but how could she sacrifice an innocent child? Yet if she did nothing, her son would die. The herbalist broke the silence. "You must make your decision before nightfall tomorrow." Patience left the herbalist's hut with a heavy heart, not knowing what to do. That night, Patience sat by George's bedside, watching him struggle to breathe. His skin was pale and clammy, his once bright eyes now dull and lifeless. His gentle spirit, the boy who used to laugh and play, seemed to be slipping away. Patience wept silently, her heart aching with fear and sorrow. She thought about what the herbalist had said. To save her son, she would have to take another child's life. She had always been a good person. She had always been kind and generous. But now, faced with the possibility of losing George, she felt trapped. The hours passed slowly, and with each minute, George grew weaker. Patience looked at her son, and her heart screamed for her to act. She couldn't just sit there and watch him die. She couldn't let the one person she loved more than anything slip away from her. "I have to save him," she whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. "I can't lose him." The next day, Patience made up her mind. She would do whatever it took to save her son, even if it meant doing something terrible. Patience, overwhelmed with guilt, searched the streets for a boy about her son George's age. She found a poor but happy boy selling items by the roadside and, offering him money to help his family, convinced him to come with her. Unaware of her true intentions, the boy agreed and followed her to the herbalist's hut. As night fell, the herbalist prepared for the ritual, while Patience, filled with sorrow, watched helplessly. The ritual took the boy's life, transferring his spirit into George's body. Patience watched in horror as the ritual ended. The boy was gone, and George was saved. The herbalist turned to Patience. "It is done. Your son will live." Patience rushed back to her son's side. George was awake, his strength slowly returning. He looked at her with bright, clear eyes, and for the first time in days, he smiled. "Mom, is that you?" George said weakly. Patience wept with relief, holding her son close. She had saved him. The ritual had worked. But deep inside, a shadow of guilt lingered. She had taken a life to save her own child. What would that mean for the future? For a few weeks, everything seemed to be going well. George was getting stronger each day, and Patience was overjoyed to have her son back. She thought that life would return to normal and that the terrible night of the ritual would be nothing but a bad memory. But something was different. At first, the changes were small. George started being more impatient and irritable. He snapped at his mother when she asked him simple questions, something he had never done before. Patience dismissed it, thinking that maybe it was just the effect of his long illness. But things soon became worse. George started hanging out with a rough crowd. He stopped helping around the house and even started skipping school. Patience was shocked. This wasn't the George she had raised. Her sweet, gentle boy had turned into someone unrecognizable. One day, George came home with bruises on his face. Patience asked him what had happened, and he shrugged, saying he had been in a fight. He didn't seem to care about anything anymore. Patience's heart broke every day as she watched her son change. Patience couldn't take it anymore. She returned to the herbalist, desperate for answers. She told him about George's change in behavior and how he was no longer the boy she once knew. The herbalist looked at her with deep sorrow in his eyes. "What did you expect?" he asked quietly. Patience stared at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" "The boy whose life you took, his spirit now lives inside your son. His anger, his pain, his loss, they are all part of your son now. You saved George's body, but his soul is no longer the same." Patience felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under her. She had saved George, but at what cost? The boy whose life she had taken now controlled her son's body. That was why George had changed so much. It wasn't just the illness. It was the spirit of the boy she had sacrificed. Things spiraled out of control quickly after that. George became more violent and uncontrollable. He no longer listened to Patience, and she was powerless to stop him. He would leave the house for days at a time, returning only to cause more trouble. One night, after yet another argument, George pushed his mother in a fit of anger. She stumbled and hit her head on the corner of a table. The pain shot through her like fire, and she collapsed to the ground. George didn't even seem to notice. He stormed out of the house, leaving his mother lying there, helpless and bleeding. Patience's vision blurred as she lay on the floor, her body growing weaker. She realized with heartbreaking clarity that she had lost everything. The boy she had sacrificed, the boy she had brought home in the name of saving her son, had destroyed her life. By the time the neighbors found her, it was too late. Patience was gone, a victim of her own choices. News of Patience's death spread quickly through the city. People whispered about how the once wealthy and powerful woman had fallen from grace, all because of her desperate love for her son. They said that in her attempt to save George, she had unleashed something far worse. As for George, he disappeared into the streets, lost and wandering. He was no longer the boy Patience had loved so dearly, and his spirit was consumed by the soul of the boy whose life had been taken. And so, the tale of Patience and George became a warning to others. Love is powerful, but when mixed with desperation, it can lead to choices that no one should have to make. Some sacrifices once made can never be undone, and that is the story of a mother's love, a son's fate, and the terrible price that was paid. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. Thank you for watching and see you next time.